Jupiter moves into Leo at the end of June, and today I want to talk about Jupiter, I want to talk about Leo, and I want to talk about what generally happens when these two archetypes meet. This ingress is happening on June 30th, and Jupiter is going to stay in Leo until July of 2027, so about 13 months. And this is a really interesting pairing, especially because Jupiter has just spent the past year in its exalted position in Cancer. And Cancer and Leo are ruled by the two luminaries, and they're very, very, very different, right? So, over the last year, the Jupiterian qualities of expansion and growth and meaning and truth and purpose have come through the lens of Cancer and the moon, the unconscious world, the past, nostalgia, emotional growth. And then when Jupiter moves into the realm of the sun, of consciousness itself, it really amps things up. So you may have heard about Jupiter and Leo already being a time of creativity and self-confidence and self-expression, and those things are very true. And also there are more subtle qualities about this transit that will be coming up during the next 13 months. So let's talk a little bit more about Jupiter. Jupiter is often called the greater benefic, right? So this is a planet that people generally move toward because it generally is something that brings beneficial things into our lives. Now, that's not always the case because, of course, with everything, there is a shadow quality. So, some of the gifts of Jupiter is that it's often associated with the higher mind rather than the reptilian mind. So, there's this sense of wisdom here. This is a space that Jupiter governs faith, having faith. And a lot of times people say Jupiter is lucky, and there may be something about that. They say Jupiterian people are favored by the gods. And also, what I find to be very true as well is that Jupiterian people and Jupiter really represents having so much faith in something that you're willing to take more risks than other people. And so on the outside, it can look like a lot of luck, but it's not just that. There's something that goes deeper than just the luck. There's a sense of expansion here, right? So there can be growth in whatever arena Jupiter is in. So if it's in a certain house, that area of your life can grow. In Leo, we see some qualities growing, right? Where can we lean into for expansion? Jupiter is also where we kind of orient around meaning and truth in our lives. It's a very spiritual planet, very religious planet, even. And of course, abundance is here, right? The growth of things. A lot of times we don't talk enough about maybe like Jupiter's desire for worldly ambitions. In his book about Jupiter, Stephen Arroyo talks about the glyph of Jupiter. And I find it really interesting because if you look at the glyph of Jupiter and Saturn, you'll see that they're very similar. And Saturn's almost the Jupiter glyph inverted, it's upside down. And if we look at that as a cross with a half circle being added for both of these glyphs, we see that there's a slight difference, right? In Saturn's glyph, the half circle is on the bottom of the cross, and in Jupiter it's on the top. And what this can show us is that Jupiter tends to position itself in a way that it is governing over or has some control over the natural process of life, the material world. This is why Jupiter people can be really, really successful and ambitious. And if we look at Saturn's glyph, that half circle is on the bottom. And what this can show is more of a subservience to the natural world, right? This is why Saturn is associated to the limitations of the 3D reality and how we can learn and grow from those limitations, whereas Jupiter goes and extends beyond the physical realm. So there can be this ambitious quality to Jupiter as well. And this can bring in a lot of abundance, whether that's a feeling of abundance or actual material abundance in one's life. And then we move into the sign of Leo, which is the fifth sign in the zodiac. And Leo is really about self-expression, right? It's ruled by the sun. So there's this nobility, there's this dignity, and Jupiter kind of shares this as well, actually, this nobility. There is this confidence. There is a warmth to Leo, and there is a creativity, there is a confidence here. Leo rules over the heart in medical astrology as well, so there is a generous heart. I love talking about Leo. I actually have my Jupiter in Leo and my ascendant and Mars there as well. And so I really love talking about this because this sign, and I think a lot of fire signs often get a lot of flack in our world for being too oriented around the self, what some will call selfish or self serving. And in our day to day world, that can often be seen as a negative thing. But for a lot of reasons that I've talked about in other videos and the changes that are happening in 2027, this self-serving is really asking us to start looking at it from a different perspective. And so even though Leos can be very generous, oftentimes they can seem very selfish because there is a lot of emphasis on the self. The Leo's way of relating to other people is through sharing of themselves. So it's a way of being generous with one's experiences. And so therefore being very self-expressive as an act of generosity often. And when Jupiter contacts Leo, it's going to blow up, it's going to grow all of the Leo qualities, both shadow and the gifts. And so this is really going to show us where we need more courage, we need more creativity, we need more confidence, and also where we may be thinking about ourselves as being really important and not giving credence to more of the Aquarian themes, right? I always like working in oppositions of the collective and what is actually happening in the world. And it's not just all about us and what we want, right? And this is actually something that is going to come up in a really real way because as soon as Jupiter moves into Leo, it will start its opposition to Pluto in Aquarius, which is really bringing up themes around power struggles within the collective and what they need, what we need to do in order to belong with the mainstream community versus what I desire, right? And what I want. So we're going to see this happening very early on with this Jupiter and Leo transit. That Pluto Jupiter opposition is going to perfect on July 20th. But like I said, we're going to start feeling it almost immediately. And so there may be some power struggles depending on where this is falling in your chart, this opposition that is going to ask for a really deep level of integration. So we'll come back to this. I just want to talk a little bit more about Jupiter and Leo coming together. I want to read from Ren Butler's The Archetypal Universe. This is on my book list, and I'll be doing my semi-annual book list update soon, so you guys will be kept up to date on what books I'm reading currently. But this is on there. This is archetypes coming together of planets. So it's not necessarily Jupiter and Leo, but I'm looking at Jupiter and the sun, right? Because the sun is what rules the ruler of Leo. So the principles here are a warm and sunny nature, a dramatic flair and enthusiasm for life, outflowing zest and joy, goodwill and generosity. Now, on the negative side, there can be tendencies towards arrogance and inflation, grandiosity and self-importance, ethical blind spots, and attitudes of entitlement. So I love talking about this because, as I mentioned, Leo people can often be seen as egotistical, right, or selfish. And this is really when I tell people, like, they are ruled by the sun. They are literally what our solar system is orienting around. And so sometimes on the shadow end, this can lead to a big sense of importance of the self that when it's integrated can bring a lot of leadership and confidence instead, that people can look to Leos to be inspired by their courage, by their confidence. One of the things that I love talking about is the sun's association to the ego. So even in Jungian psychology, we can see the sun's association to the ego. And the sun here is often, or I'm sorry, the ego is often demonized. And the ego is needed. A healthy sense of self is needed because what happens when we don't have a healthy sense of self is that we are pulled towards every which direction, right? And this is a lot of people who are like psychopathic or sociopathic don't have a really good sense of self. It can be very, very painful. Now, if we don't want to be attached to our sense of self to a degree that it is making us this self-aggrandizing, this too high of self-importance, but we also don't want to lack a sense of self at all. And this transit of Jupiter and Leo is going to have us looking at that because just a couple of weeks after Jupiter moves here, the South Node is going to move into Leo. And the South Node is a much different influence than Jupiter. South Node is really about releasing, it's about draining, it's about loss, it's about refining. So rather than this big, massive glow up of an energy, we're very immediately going to, number one, have that tension with Pluto. And number two, we're going to have this influence of the South Node also coming through. And there's some important transits that are going to happen. We'll talk about that later in the year. But you can even think about just July, as soon as the South Node moves here, and then Jupiter has that exact opposition to Pluto, July 20th. I mean, July, you guys, is really slated to be a very intense month. July 2026 is a very, very critical month collectively and personally. But from the lens of this, from the perspective of this archetype, it's also going to be kind of bringing a lot of things to the forefront. When I think about the South Node being here, it really feels like we're not going to get away with old ways of attachment to self. So if there has been an over reliance on our confidence or our courage or creativity and being seen, right? I think about Leo and it's very visible. The sun doesn't hide, the sun is always there. And it's not meant to hide. This is also something I really love about Leo people is that they don't like secrets. They're very open and honest about things because the sun doesn't like shadows, right? This is the consciousness. It likes to bring light into wherever it goes. So when the South Node goes through here, it's going to ask us like, and then with Jupiter here, it's like, what are you crafting your life around? Where are you finding purpose in your sense of self? And is that including your service to humanity and your belonging in certain communities? I really think this is going to be a major theme, especially in the beginning of Jupiter moving into Leo, is like, how can I be myself and still feel a sense of belonging, still feel like I can be of service and not get this massive pushback? How can I craft my own direction without losing a sense of service? I also wanted to read a little bit from that Exploring Jupiter book, what Stephen Arroyo says about Jupiter in Leo. Seeks to grow and to improve oneself through creative activity, freely expressing one's exuberant vitality through warm, supportive encouragement of others. This is the thing, is like Leo, like I said, will often it will talk about itself a lot in order to give encouragement to others, in order to lift others up as well, obviously, when it's working more on the gift side. Trust in a higher order can be hindered by egotism and an arrogant, domineering attitude, but usually has an innate and irrepressible faith in life. Now, this is about the natal aspect, but we can, of course, apply it to this transit. A need to act impressively and be recognized by others leads to confidence in self, has a well-developed sense of showmanship and flair. Yeah, this is where it becomes very different than Jupiter and Cancer, because Jupiter is exalted there, but it's like a quiet, emotional thing, right? And now we move into the artist, the performer. And this is where we are being asked collectively to grow, to expand, to allow ourselves to be a little bit more dramatic, to allow ourselves to kind of, it's not about performance as in fakeness, because actually Leo is very much about authenticity, about acting from the heart and being true to oneself. So it's not about performing in that sense, but it's performance in the sense of fun, exuberance, vitality, right? That's what the sun really represents. The sun is our sense of clarity of life, our sense of our direction as well. So that's why this theme of who are you truly, and to remember that who we are is already very innate in us in a lot of ways. I talked about this recently in my full moon in Sagittarius video. If we try too hard to create ourselves, we may miss the magic of who we already are. And this is why I honestly love doing unconscious pattern work. And that's really a main staple of my work. And because we get to not just see our shadows, but to also see our gifts that maybe we haven't been able to see from our conscious awareness. And I think the fact that the South Node is going to be here with Jupiter is really pointing us toward not seeking or clinging to these external validations of who we are or who we believe we should be, and rather having and finding this innate sense of self internally, because that South Node can be very spiritual as well. We're going to find that if we're trying too hard to be someone for the sake of recognition or validation or importance, and not to be of service, I think we're going to find that it's going to be difficult. There's a lot of discussion out there around like co-creating your life. And I do think we definitely have free will, and we can make a lot of decisions and choices that move toward that. And also, once again, if we're too focused on creation and not on remembering what's already here, it can really it can take us away from that sense of self that's really grounded in something. Do you guys know that guy that goes around and like interviews billionaires? There was this one billionaire that said something that actually surprised me. And at first I was like unsure about this, but then I was like, no, I actually think this is true in some ways. And he was asking him, what do you think helped you get here? And the billionaire said something like, honestly, I think a lot of it is luck and disposition, essentially. And he made a reference to, in the animal kingdom, if a sloth is born, he's not ever going to become the king of the jungle. He's a sloth, and that's kind of his role. And some other people are just born with certain things, and that kind of really goes along with astrology and human design. Not to say that possibilities are not there for us, but that not everyone is here to be a millionaire or a billionaire. And Tom Brady actually in an interview said a very similar thing, where they were asking him like, what does it take to be the GOAT? And he's like, honestly, there's a part of me that was just born this way. Like, he gave an example of when his older sister was in high school. She decided she's going to wake up early and go to the gym every morning at like 5 a.m. And he was like 11. And he's like, I'm going to do it with you. And he was like, there was just always this sense of structure and responsibility. And he has a Sun Saturn conjunction in Leo. So that's really interesting to see that he has this idea too. And I think because a lot of times what we hear out in the world is like, oh, you can do anything you want. And I love that idea, right? I love that. And I do think that's true. But oftentimes it has us orienting our lives towards worldly ambitions that may be not our biggest gifts. I have a lot I could share on this, but I'll save that for later. Some personal stories and some messages that I've received throughout my life during around those themes of maybe you're not here to have that. And maybe just because you desire it doesn't mean that it's what you are here to really do. And I think this Jupiter Pluto opposition is really going to show us or have us have to reckon with that in some way, um, and transform something in us that has been orienting around meaning, truth, and purpose in a way that is not going to truly help us fulfill a mission that we can only fulfill. And so we may have to release some of those old ideas of what purpose and meaning were in our lives in order to step into our true authority, our true leadership, our true confidence, and to be really visible in order to to share those gifts and inspire other people, and to have that abundance, true abundance that is really ours to have. So once again, like, this isn't really so much about you just becoming this super self-confident, super self-expressive person. Yes, those things are definitely there. And also, it's really going to ask you to look at what you are using that in service of. I would love to hear where this is happening in your birth chart and how you're feeling into this. What are your thoughts on this? Because something has lost its meaning for this next phase in your life. I really do think that this is personally and collectively beautiful, beautiful alignment to have both of these, even if it may not be easy all the time, because Jupiter in Leo does sometimes get really expansive. It gets really, really big, sometimes too big, and sometimes it needs that little check to say, hey, where are you going, without it becoming solemn, right? Or falling into pity and despair, and really finding that balance for oneself. So thanks so much for joining me on this journey. I am making some changes in my offers. I am really excited to share that with you guys soon, and just see where this journey is taking us together. And thank you so much for being here and for listening to this video, watching this video. I'll see you next time.